Well, welcome back to part 2 of The Awakening. Accountability, resolutions, national security, and more. This time we're going to cover the cover-up. I'm going to ask some questions. So, our first question would be, what was behind all this denial? We saw part of it in part 1, and there's more to come. Let's begin with the GOP House and their version of lobbyists, and then take a look at what President Trump just had to say. So let's start and roll that.
The lobbyists in D.C. are freaking out. Now, life for working class Americans was on the upswing, as you remember, during the Trump years. Real median wages were up, gas prices were low, consumer confidence was high, and inflation, we know that was non-existent. Of course, the regime media, though, tried to downplay his populist appeal and pretend like his entire agenda was tax cuts for the rich.
This is a big, wet kiss for corporations and millionaires and billionaires.
Trump's plan is not to help middle-class folks and the working folks.
All of his policies are trying to crush poor people.
The giant Trump tax cuts for the rich did not have long-term stimulative effect for the economy.
Completely ludicrous, completely false. And more than 2 years after he left office, we're slowly but surely seeing how Trump has transformed the GOP. Now, case in point, according to Politico, those D.C. lobbyists are really worried over the new chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, Missouri Congressman Jason Smith. Corporate tax lobbyists are not used to taking heat from Republicans, and many don't know what to make of Smith. People are wondering how best to approach him with corporate issues, said one former Republican tax aide. People have spun themselves into a frenzy. Now, if you didn't know this, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, it's one of the most important jobs in Washington. Every tax and every trade bill goes through the Ways and Means Committee. None of the other House committees have this authority, and the committee is never going to report a bill that the chair doesn't agree with. So Congressman Smith has a huge position. But what really has K Street in an uproar is that Smith may not play the usual globalist ball. This means they're going to have to heavily lobby other members of the committee to try to overrule him.
Yep, they're trying to overrule him. The tax man throws K Street into a tizzy. You're going to hear more on that in part 3.
Which longtime lobbyist tells Politico he's already doing. In the past, the chair of Ways and Means was a champion of globalization. Former chair Kevin Brady, he was anti-tariff and a Bush Republican. Congressman Jason Smith, unless he's somehow co-opted, is obviously just what we need. The Republican Party needs to be a working class party. We've tried it the other way, when the donor class, the elites on Wall Street, when they ran the show. We were left with massive trade deficits, a stronger China, and a stagnating middle-class America. Joining me now is Congressman Jason Smith, the new chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Congressman, do you intend to stand up to any of your fellow GOP members who are hearing from those very angry and worried lobbyists?
You know, first off, Laura, thanks for having me. And I'll tell you, my fellow GOP members on the Ways and Means Committee stand with me in that the Republican Party is the party of the working class. Who would have ever even thought that the fact that you said your priority is the American worker, small businesses, and family farmers, that would cause K Street to turn into a tizzy? But it's all about what our priorities are in the party. And I'll tell you, the people on my committee, they're behind us.
On the trade issue specifically, President Trump released his big trade plan today, which, I mean, if it wasn't written by someone like a Bob Lighthizer, who's, in my mind, the best USTR we ever had, then it was someone who thinks like him, because it was very heavy on America First priorities, tariffs when needed, and putting China back on its heels after the massive trade deficit we had last year. Do you agree in principle with those themes as chair of the House Ways and Means?
Let me tell you, you can guarantee, first off, that Bob was a part of that and that he helped draft those policies. And we've been working with Bob. We have to make sure that we bring back our strategic supply chains back here to the United States. We need to make sure we're energy secure, we're food secure, and we're healthcare secure. We also, Laura, we need to go after these companies that have lost their American identity and they've become beholden to China. And then they still expect a handout, a taxpayer handout. These are the items that we have to look at in the Ways and Means Committee, and we got to push this administration on trade because the Biden administration, Laura, they've been out to lunch. They're doing nothing. They're allowing China to steamroll us. They're allowing no agreement. For example, the Mexico-USMCA agreement, they're not purchasing the rice from farmers that they're supposed to be purchasing from, and they're coming up with these fake trade barriers. They need to be held accountable.
And on the issue of Made in America that Biden promised in that infrastructure bill, isn't that going by the wayside because Europe complained about the electric vehicle tariff? That's another thing they're going to basically kiss goodbye.
Laura, they're definitely trying to kiss that goodbye. But you know what? It's also interesting to see some of these companies that are partnering with China to help build those batteries right there in Michigan. It's a little bit unacceptable, and it's stuff we need to be looking into.
Congressman, we're going to be watching you very carefully, and we wish you all the best.
Okay. Everything he said, we're going to try to cover quickly and with facts in this show. So, whether you like Trump or hated him, life is better for most people in the U.S. and around the world. Okay, some of you may not have been adversely affected by what Biden has done yet, but just wait. It's going to get to you yet. I've already seen this scenario played out by the same policies decades ago in my life, and I haven't forgot what happened. Many people like to. So, I mean, are you one of these global elites? Think that you're part of this crowd that won't be affected? We'll see. Watch out when reality comes to bite you. So we have K Street. I don't care about the working class. Think about it. Most of us are part of the working class. You know, U.S.-based companies don't care about the U.S. or our supply chains and the essential needs that we need every day just to maintain our life. We're not just talking about our quality of life. Our quality of life has been affected right now. But when it comes down to the time you start worrying about being able to maintain life, is that what it's going to take to wake you up? I don't know. So, you know, everything in Washington, D.C. swamp was and will again be under attack. And this guy sounds like he's on the level and he's trying to do well. But with that being said, let's listen to a few clips from President Trump when he spoke at CPAC. And let's see if he's hitting the right tone and pushing the right buttons right now. All right.
There's only one president in history who has ever taken on the entire corrupt establishment in Washington. And when we win in 2024, we will do it again, even stronger, faster, and better because now I am experienced and I know the people of Washington. I didn't know them. I was from New York. I only came here 17 times, they said. I read that in the fake news, so probably it's not true. I now know the good ones, the bad ones, the weak ones, the strong ones. I know them all. I know the people that have to do the job and can do the job. A lot of them are in this room right now. And as I did for 4 incredible years, I will put America first every single time, every single day. As we gather today, our country and our movement, the greatest political movement in the history of our country. There's nobody going to even question it. Even the fake news media, that's a lot of fake news back then. Most important battle in our lives is taking place right now as we speak. For 7 years, you and I have been engaged in an epic struggle to rescue our country from the people who hate it. If those opposing us succeed, our once beautiful USA will be a failed country that no one will even recognize, a lawless, open borders, crime-ridden, filthy communist nightmare. That's what it's going, and that's where it's going. We're now in a Marxism state of mind, a communism state of mind, which is far worse. We're a nation in decline. Our enemies are desperate to stop us because they know that we are the only ones who can stop them. The ultimate victory, we're going to make America great again. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers. They are people that don't get it, although in some cases they get it. They get it for their wallets. And we will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists. We will throw off the political class that hates our country. They actually hate our country. We will beat the Democrats. We will rout the fake news media. We will expose and appropriately deal with the rhinos. We will evict Joe Biden from the White House. And we will liberate America from these villains and scoundrels once and for all. We had a Republican Party that was ruled by freaks, neocons, globalists, open border zealots, and fools. But we are never going back to the party of Paul Ryan, Karl Rove, and Jeb Bush. We're not going back to people that want to destroy our great social security system, even some in our own party. I wonder who that might be. And that are out to cut Medicare to a level that it will no longer be recognizable. And when that was their original thought, that's what they always come back to. Remember that. You have to remember that. You heard it here first. We are never going back to a party that wants to give unlimited money to fight foreign wars that are endless wars, that are stupid wars. But at the same time demands that we cut veterans' benefits and retirement benefits at home. Illegal immigrants come in and we house them in the Waldorf Astoria and many other of the greatest hotels anywhere in the world.
There you go. We picked those little segments out for a reason. Because everything he's saying is shaking the establishment swamp in Washington, D.C. Trump is right. He took on the corrupt establishment government. It's like, I'm not some group who just follows anybody. I watched their actions. He took on as much as he could and challenged them all, even though he was surrounded by the swamp. He was betrayed by people in his own administration. You've seen Fauci. You listen to Redfield. We're going to have another segment with him later on. We're going to play it. But he did that. You know, are you selling out your own country for short-term profits? There's more of that coming in segment 3. When we play you a couple of segments from the Committee on Communist China, a bipartisan committee. See, what's unique about Trump, and I said this before, is he's failed in a lot of his endeavors through life, but he's learned from his mistakes. And that's what he just told you. He just learned. If you listen to that whole thing, he goes into more detail. You'll understand. But that's available on C-SPAN. You can go right there and Google it and watch the whole thing if you'd like. But that makes him, a man that learns from his mistakes, that makes that man or woman extremely dangerous because they know better. And they already know he's got a track record that proves he can fix the mistakes. You know, he's talking about all of our freedoms and liberty and the freedoms for future generations. That's what's at stake in this next election, if we can even get to it. I don't know what, after we show you more, I don't know what Biden's capable of doing. He worries me. The Democrats, it's not the JFK party anymore. Wake the hell up. These people are socialists, but not even just socialists. Let's call them what they are. They're communists. They're coming at your kids. They're shaping your children's mind. They're coming after your communities, your quality of life. They're coming at us from all directions. And there's not that many of them. There's more of us than there are of them. They can be crushed. It's just you got to be willing to take a stand. And by this document right here, you have every right to take a stand. All right? I like the way he called out the GOP freaks. And he called them exactly what they are. War profiteers, the Karl Rove, the Jeb Bushes, the whole Bush family was corrupt. So when people say, well, how come you're not a Republican? Because I could never endorse a Bush, never have. I never will. I can't endorse a Clinton, a Romney, a John Kerry. All these people were running. I always went third party. Ron Paul in 88, Ross Perot twice, for Pat Buchanan in 2000. Everybody had things to say about him, but I'll tell you, he was right on the money. And now this is what we get. Obama, forget about it. But see, this is the part that everyone's saying about how don't call out people of your own party and listen to these pundits on TV. They don't even get what's happening because they're sitting on TV and they're making a good buck. The rest of us are trying to get by it, and a lot of us know what's going on. The rest of us are trying to explain to others what's going on. So it doesn't matter what party you are, you know, and he's going to protect, and this is what makes him more dangerous too, because he's going to protect benefits for Americans. And this time he's going to do it. He's a man of his word. He will do what needs to be done, and he has. Everything he's done and tried to do, he's went for it. So anybody who's telling you any different, well, I don't know. I don't know what their agenda is. They're just liars. But the damn communists wants to protect your benefits. Social Security wants to take care of the veterans. You have veterans living on the street, and he's right. And there's a protest, a couple of months ago, when the immigrants in New York City were living in the Waldorf Astoria, and they were throwing them out. They didn't want to go to a nice tent city, and a tent city is better than where most of these people and the homeless Americans are living on the streets. But enough of that. Let's move on and let's listen to, I think this is Dr. Well, I'm not sure which one. This must be Dr. Redfield, this clip again. Let's roll this.
The former CDC director, Dr. Robert Redfield. Doctor, great to have you with us today. You went out on a limb and you said, I do believe that this was a virus that was supercharged because it was man-made in a lab. What do you make now of these findings? And people say, why is the Department of Energy looking into this? But it's actually a very specialized division of the Department of Energy at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. These people are experts in bioweapons, germ warfare. So what do you think it is that changed their thinking on this?
Well, I think it's note that both the FBI and now the Department of Energy have come to the conclusion that they believe this virus came from the Wuhan lab. And what's important about their workforce is they have an enormous, powerful scientific workforce. And I think they really did approach this in an aggressive scientific way. Maybe some of the other intelligence agencies don't really have the depth, as you mentioned, Livermore. But energy has a lot of science depth, and I think they really looked at this scientifically. FEI obviously has a lot of science depth. They looked at it scientifically. Obviously, the information in the energy report is still classified, but I do believe, as I said before, over 2 years ago, that I think that clearly the origin of this virus was a leak from the Wuhan lab, and eventually that will, people will come to realize that. Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I will say a couple things quickly that scientifically, I think the argument that Fauci and Collins and others have made that this was from nature because it was like SARS and like MERS is misleading, because both SARS and MERS, when they came from a bat into an intermediate host and then into man, never learned how to go man to man. In the first epidemic of SARS and MERS, it was less than 1,000 cases. And we sit here today, 18 years later, it's less than 10,000 cases. COVID came from into man and immediately was enormously transmissible, which in my view meant that it was educated in a laboratory how to infect human tissue. And we know there's a publication from 2014 from that laboratory saying they succeeded in taking bat coronaviruses to bind to a key human receptor, the H2 receptor. And so I find it really upsetting to me scientifically when good scientists get up and say, hey, it has to be a spillover event from nature because that's like COVID and that's like SARS and that's like MERS. And in fact, it's nothing like SARS and MERS. It's nothing like that at all. This is extremely unique, and I think really does show, and that doesn't even get into the nuances of the virus and the furin cleavage site and a lot of the other speculation.
Exactly.
So I think these scientists finally really went and looked at the science and said, the science doesn't add up, that this came out of nature.
Yeah, well,
The Wall Street Journal reported that the Biden administration has finally concluded that, yes, COVID was not naturally occurring. It didn't emerge organically from a pangolin, whatever that is, at the wet market, whatever that is. No, the virus came from a Chinese military lab where it was created. That's the determination of the Department of Energy based on new intelligence that, of course, everyone already had. Now, we learned this, interestingly, from a newspaper. We did not learn it directly from the Biden administration because Joe Biden hasn't said a word about it. And that's a little odd. 1 million Americans, they tell us, died of COVID. Close to 7 million died globally. So it's inherently a big story. Now, well, Joe Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, went on CNN yesterday to answer precisely none of these questions. Instead, he told us, we're still not sure where it came from. Watch this.
Did the coronavirus pandemic start in a lab? Is that what you believe now?
Well, Dana, there is a variety of views in the intelligence community. Some elements of the intelligence community have reached conclusions on one side, some on the other. A number of them have said they just don't have enough information to be sure. And if we gain any further insider information, we will share it with Congress and we will share it with the American people. But right now, there is not a definitive answer that has emerged from the intelligence community on this question.
They're lying. We know perfectly well where COVID came from. We've known this for years. In fact, one of the very first things we knew about COVID was that it was an engineered virus that escaped somehow, intentionally or not, from a Chinese military biolab in Wuhan. It was in early March of 2020, 3 full years ago, at the very beginning, that we did a long open on this show about the Chinese research paper whose authors later disappeared. Now, these Chinese scientific researchers scolded the Chinese government for the lax safety standards that they said allowed COVID to escape and infect the world. This was 3 years ago. Watch this. In fact, the outbreak may have begun not in a public meat market, but in a poorly run Chinese laboratory. Now, that's not our theory. Anyone who raises that theory on American television is attacked as a conspiracy monger. But this is a theory from a now censored Chinese paper. A draft paper posted in mid-February, scientists at the South China University of Technology suggested that the coronavirus outbreak began at the Wuhan Center for Disease Control, where an animal may have infected a researcher who then spread the disease outside the facility. The paper is explicit about this. We're going to quote it. The killer coronavirus probably originated from a laboratory in Wuhan, end quote. So it's not like we did a lot of hard-hitting reporting with our Chinese-speaking staff. That paper was in English on the internet, and anyone who was interested could have found it. We were just interested. That's why we found it. And then we found someone who was there. We found a Chinese physician, a scientific researcher who worked for the Chinese government in and around Wuhan when COVID emerged from that lab. Her name is Li Mingyan, and we did a bunch of interviews with her. Here's one.
From my first report, I can present solid scientific evidence to our audience that this virus, COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 virus, actually is not from nature. I work with the top coronavirologists in the world. So together with my experience, I can tell you this is created in the lab. this is from that template owned by China military, and also it is spread to the world to make such damage.
To make such damage, do you believe the Chinese government released this intentionally, on purpose? Did they do this?
Yes, of course, it's intentionally.
Wow. Now, we thought that was a story. So there was a physician who worked on coronaviruses for the Chinese military who was in Wuhan telling us in September of 2020 that the Chinese government did this intentionally to wreck the West, to kill people and destroy the economies of its rivals here in the West. Now, if you're a middle-class Christian American, it's hard to imagine that level of malice existing anywhere in the world. You just would never consider doing something like that. But with the Chinese, are they serious enough? Probably.
Yep, probably. Now, let's take apart what was said between those two clips. She was saying this virus didn't come from nature. Well, the virus itself lives in nature. And that's what Dr. Redfield was talking about. He was talking about how this just didn't show up. This had to be, as he put it, educated in a lab. So in part 3, I'm going to do my best to explain and show you some facts in a paper that we reviewed going back into 2020 when all this first started. And I'm going to try to put it as simple as possible and try to uncomplicate a very complicated topic for you. But we're putting together a book called Timeline to Tyranny, COVID-19, and this is where I came about it. I think we're gonna have to start releasing some of the chapters, but this is where it came from. So here's the question, when the information was available to you, did you just accept it and obey? Were you one of these people that Tucker's talking about, who are calling other people conspiracy mongers? So this is where the question comes in. So we're going to have a little more for you here. Let's roll this next clip.
The real story, the great outrage of this story, is that the people who knew or should have known the truth lied about the truth. Why? To hide the Chinese government's role in mass murder, the killing of almost 7 million people and the destruction of the American economy. From the beginning of the outbreak, the American media, as one, took the side of the Chinese government in this new propaganda war over COVID. And Trump, once again, to his credit, knew. He knew exactly where this came from. He didn't say so directly, he should have, but instead he alluded to it. He called COVID the China virus. And when he did that, he was over the target, so the Chinese government attacked him. They've learned a thing or two from watching American politics as a, quote, racist. One Chinese news outlet tweeted this, quote, racism is not the right tool to cover your own incompetence. NBC News called the phrase Chinese virus, quote, both inaccurate and harmful in tying racist associations between the virus and those from China.
There you go. Right there. You're a racist if you don't believe the narrative.
No one asked a single question. Joe Biden and his lackeys in the media all repeated the talking point. Watch this.
But neither should we panic or fall back on xenophobia. Labeling COVID-19 a foreign virus does not displace accountability.
The president referred to the coronavirus as a, quote, foreign virus. And I think it's going to it's going to come across to a lot of Americans as smacking of xenophobia.
The administration's labeling of this virus as foreign is undoubtedly playing into the rising xenophobia about it. Trump isn't cautioning us to check our racism, but is rather stoking xenophobic sentiment.
The president says it's a foreign virus as if this was launched on us like an attack. We know what that's about. That's about him playing xenophobia, works with his base.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China.
Every one of the people you just saw should resign in disgrace and should spend the next decade in ashes and sackcloth pondering what they've done, which is cover for a crime. And by the way, if the U.S. media had swung behind the evidence in this story and pressed, where did this virus come from? then it's at least potentially conceivable that scientists in the United States would have forced the government of China to release the information they had about the genetic makeup of COVID. Maybe we've had a vaccine that worked, for example, or a medical response that saved Americans' lives, but they didn't. The New York Times' top global health and COVID reporter, a person called Purva Mandavili, wrote, quote, "Someday we will stop talking about the lab leak theory and maybe even admit its racist roots. But alas, that day is not today." Where is the Oberlin Sociology Department New York Times pipeline? Like, when did that start? Why are they hiring the dumbest and most reflexive people who take their opinions wholesale from the hive of Twitter? Announced as crazed science deniers. Science deniers, okay. Senator Tom Cotton was attacked because he relied on a map and common sense to ask a very simple question. Here's what he said.
Here's what we do know. This virus did not originate in the Wuhan animal market. Just a few miles away from that food market is China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that researches human infectious diseases. Now, we don't have evidence that this disease originated there, but because of China's duplicity and dishonesty from the beginning, we need to at least ask the question.
And by the way, that wasn't a guess. A wet market is a seafood market. A pangolin is a mammal. So they weren't selling pangolins in a seafood market, for one thing. For another, a group of Chinese researchers went and interviewed everybody in the wet market and asked, have you ever seen a pangolin for sale here? Or bats, another mammal? No, not one had. That was February 2020. So what we knew at that point was the Chinese government's lying. Tom Cotton was absolutely right. And for his trouble, he was called insane, a conspiracy theorist.
Tom Cotton, a couple of days ago, spouting a conspiracy theory that the Chinese made this virus up. Don't try to spool up some of whoever was wearing tinfoil hats in your audience.
Let's apply Occam's razor and just call crazy. This is crazy. This is an insane thing to do. It's just wildly irresponsible and was totally unnecessary. I don't know what Tom Cotton gets out of this.
In the 1980s, I remember when the far left trafficked in rumors about HIV having been invented in CIA labs. The far right has now found its own virus conspiracy theory.
Keep that in mind, what he just said about HIV, because there's going to be a connection coming up.
As NPR reported, quote, scientists debunk lab accident theory of pandemic emergence. Really, on what basis? They had no evidence to, quote, debunk it. But that didn't stop Vox from, quote, reporting, and we're quoting now, no, coronavirus did not start in a Chinese lab.
It did. Look at that. They're lying right to you.
No idea. They were just flat out shilling for the Chinese government and hiding its complicity in mass murder. What? And then a woman called Laura Helmuth, the diversity hire now running the once but no longer respected publication Scientific American, said, quote, it's a conspiracy theory to believe a lab leak had occurred. But it did. Even the quote, comedians, they were on propaganda duty too. Watch this.
He's also pushing U.S. intelligence to find evidence for this theory that the virus was accidentally released from a lab in Wuhan. That's his new angle to feed the wingnuts, to treat this virus like it was a conspiracy of some kind.
It should have never happened. This plague should never have happened. It could have been stopped. But people chose not to stop it.
What people? Tomorrow he'll blame the Spanish flu on Antonio Banderas.
Yeah. Imagine if you're a comedian and all of a sudden your cue card has all kinds of talking points from politicians and foreign governments on it. Well, at one point, MSNBC's Nicole Wallace, the single most dishonest person on television now or ever, claimed that, and we're quoting, Donald Trump is turning his intelligence community to now investigate a conspiracy theory about COVID coming from a lab in Wuhan. By the way, watching this woman's show, but is she in tears tonight begging the forgiveness of her audience? On March 17th, 2020, a group of scientists wrote a paper in Nature magazine. That paper concluded that, quote, we do not believe that any type of laboratory-based scenario is plausible. Now, well, internal NIH emails show that Tony Fauci helped edit that paper. He did not disclose this publicly. It was all behind the scenes. Now, that's significant because Fauci was funding bat coronavirus experiments in Wuhan, the ones that apparently caused the pandemic. As Paul Thacker reports on his Substack, just a few days after that paper was published in Nature, the State Department's Office of Outreach, part of the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, began promoting these false findings, these lies. The State Department covertly recruited scientists to go around Washington, D.C. in off-the-record high-level meetings, telling everyone who had listed that COVID, quote, emerged naturally in an animal before crossing to humans and was not engineered.
It was not engineered. What did we just hear from Redfield?
A lab. Now, the scientists who made this false briefing, who told these lies, cited one source, the Nature article that was secretly edited by Tony Fauci. America's, not China's, America's entire leadership class, from the government to the intel agencies to elected officials to, of course, the media in unison, spent years trying to hide Chinese culpability for the greatest crime in human history. They cooked up fake papers and bogus data. They attacked anyone who asked obvious questions, even people who were in Wuhan at the time who knew. And you have to ask, why did they do this? Could it be that they were implicated in this too? Dr.
So, who are these creatures that are lying to us? We let that whole role play because you had to hear it. It can only be chopped down so much. You look at the evidence, and there's more coming in part 3. But you look at this, they lied. They lied for the communist Chinese. These are people on U.S. media selling you out, putting your family in danger, putting you in danger. It's like, I mean, he's talking about resign in disgrace. These people need to be prosecuted and locked up. They should not have one more enjoyable day of their life. Not one. You need accountability, or this will happen again. Because right now, the injuries are showing up. But they murdered millions of people with their lies. It's possible. That doesn't absolve them of all these deaths. Okay, there's no absolution here. And the injuries now are starting to appear. And there's so many doctors speaking out about it. And this is only the beginning, because a lot of injuries don't even appear immediately. They're going to show up in the years to come. None of them, even the comedian. He shouldn't be afraid to walk the street. Because there's going to be family members who are going to be enraged. And what's their main line? And all these people that spoke out against it? You get sick and tired of being called a racist because you're not buying into what they're telling you? No. This gives you every right to question it. Every right is right here. That's why we always feature this in the show. This is what the shows are all about, the Constitution. So with that, you got to listen to this next clip. It's only a short one before we end part 2. But listen to the former vice president of EcoHealth Alliance. These are the documents they're talking about. These documents came out. Like Tucker said, he brought this stuff out February 2020. Many of us were digging in deep in 2020. Many people in social media had dug even deeper. And there's so much out there. You can go down rabbit holes. We're just giving you the basic stuff here. But watch and listen to the former VP of EcoHealth Alliance. Roll that.
Dr. Andrew Huff, he's a former Department of Energy scientist, former vice president of the EcoHealth Alliance, and author of The Truth About Wuhan. So, Doctor, why do you think your colleagues in the Energy Department are coming out with this now?
Well, there's actually been 2 reports that they put out. The first report that they put out was from Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. That was in this past summer. And this is the second report that they put out. The reason why they're putting out this report is that everyone in the world is starting to figure out what the truth is. They can't keep this bottled up. My book is having a huge impact. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies paired up with the government, and the government also simultaneously created a psychological operation to drive fear into people, and also created financial incentives or disincentives for people to get the jab.
And do you understand what the bioweapons component of this whole thing was, and how strongly do you believe that that was a factor?
Well, the bioweapon aspect or angle of this is it's gray area, and this is why. So when you're doing gain-of-function research on select agents, and there's a list of select agents which are available from different government agencies, when you're doing this type of work, it falls into a category of research known as dual-use research of concern. So the premise is that you're going to do this gain-of-function work to evolve the virus maybe 1 or 2 steps ahead in the evolutionary timeline so you can get ahead of the natural evolution. And this is actually what they were talking about on the Project Veritas tapes. Now, the problem is what actually has happened in reality is that they evolved the SARS coronavirus 150,000, 200,000 years in the future with species that would never come into contact with each other naturally in the environment, and with infectious agents that probably wouldn't be swapped between those species. They actually selected genetic characteristics to make the virus itself more infective. And a smoking gun, you can't make up what I'm about to say. A paper was published a little bit over a year ago showing that there was HIV inserts in SARS coronavirus 2, which have America's fingerprints all over it, which were actually patented by Moderna. The 2 days after this paper was published, the war in Ukraine kicks off. And I firmly believe this is not some conspiracy. I believe that that happened because they wanted to create a distraction from what is the biggest scandal in human history.
Well, Doctor, I don't know what to believe anymore, but I know who not to believe. And I'm anxious to see your movie. Thank you so much.
That was an interesting statement by Jesse at the end. But before we get to that, let's listen to what he just had to say. They turned around and increased it for dual use research, I think was the term he used. They evolved it thousands of years into the future, which from species that would never come in contact with each other. And if they did, what we're going to explain to you in part 3 is there's an immune system set up. And these species don't even cross. So, think of this now. Here's the key with Dr. Fauci and the government. HIV was found and inserts in this disease. This goes back to some serious cover-up work many of us are screaming about back in the 1980s when HIV popped up, and they tried to tell you it came from a green monkey. Many people are like, wait, that don't make sense. They come up with every ridiculous scenario in the world to try to tell you that. And people still question it. Fauci was deeply involved in that. You can even go back further with Fauci. There were whistleblowers. They were being buried just like today. And we didn't have the internet, so it's hard to get the information around. But how many people died? Just think about the suffering that these people have caused. And they're going to be allowed to walk free now? No. Accountability. Made an interesting point, and this is the point we were making too about this war in Ukraine. We got old video stuff. We'll probably put it together in a future show for you, showing how they kept probing at Russia. I think they waited for the exact time. Like you said, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a fact. They started pushing the buttons because Mr. Biden and all these other people, and it goes, it's so much deeper than Biden. Biden's just their puppet, but he's going to be a great one to use to hang out to dry when the accountability comes. But it goes deeper and it's deeper into our government. We'll get into that in another segment, in our other segment. But Jesse made an interesting comment. I don't know what to believe anymore. I know who not to believe. you. What did President Obama say? And we put together the clip for you. Once you get people not knowing what to believe, who to trust, and not trusting your own government, then we've won. Who is we? Like I said, he's part of it. They're all part of it. But with that, let's conclude part two. Let's move to part three. We're going to get deeper into more issues.